This is the Winsor Newton Cotman Sketchers Pocket Box. Let's take a look at what's inside. There's a brochure with all the different colors. I'll be showing samples of what the colors look like in the box. These are all the colors that are available. So you have 12 colors, and it comes with this tiny little paintbrush. It's good for putting in little details. I don't know if I would do an entire wash with this brush because it's so small, but it's nice that this is in here. These are pan watercolors. What this is, there's a little plastic tin, but if you look in here, there's like a dry pan of watercolor that doesn't come off on my hand or anything. And once you're done, you can buy a new one of this and replace it. And if you don't like some of these colors, you can replace them with new ones. If you're unsure what a color is, it's printed right on the side of the pan. So if you take the label off and you're not sure what it was, you can look at this. They call this the Sketchers Pocket Box for a reason, because it's so small, it does actually fit in your pocket. The approximate dimensions are 5 inches by 2.5, and it's 3/4 of an inch thick at the thickest part. This is my second one. Here's one I bought years ago, and I keep it in this bag so that I don't get paint inside my pocket or in my backpack. You could just skip the bag. As long as you let the paints dry out before you put it in your pocket, you should be fine. But you can see I made a mess of this one. I refill these up with tube watercolors, which is something I can talk about later. Since they're dry, you have to wet them before you can use them. And a lot of times I'll drop some water on each color that I think I'll use and let it soften up as I'm working on my sketch. If you feel like you're going to use all of them, you can use like a spray bottle and give the whole thing a mist. Aside from using the metal brush that comes with the kit, I also have a Cotman watercolor brush. This is the Cotman number 8. They have the number right there. There's a set of these that you can buy. They're pretty good. I've had this for years and I like how it works. Aside from that, what's really good for sketching outdoors is these water brushes. And what's cool about them is that you just fill them up with water and you just screw the top back in there. When you need water, you squeeze the handle and water drips out of the end of the brush. It's a very convenient way to wet the colors when you're working outdoors. This is my watercolor sketchbook. It's a STILLMAN and BIRN Alpha Series sketchbook. And here's a few of my sketches that I did of some boats and of parks and things. I also use it for testing out colors like this, so let's give that a try. Here's the brush that it came with. I'll dip it in some water and see what this lemon yellow hue looks like. You can see that these are loose in here. Eventually the paint will run over the sides and it'll work like a glue, so it won't do that anymore. So this is lemon yellow hue, and you can work out a wash over here. You can like add more water to it if you want to lighten it up. So I want to just show like what it looks like when you thin it out with water. And the thing about these watercolors, these are their student grade watercolors. And any color that has the word hue after it means that they used a substitute pigment in there to make it more affordable or just to make it more permanent. Here are the lightfast ratings, which means like how fade proof the paint is. And you can see AA is extremely permanent, A is permanent. So all the colors in here are either AA or A, so that's good. That's why I don't recommend using generic watercolor paints, because they normally don't test them and they could fade in time. So all these colors should not fade. I'll rinse out my brush and we'll move on to the cadmium yellow hue. You can see it's more orange than the lemon yellow, and I'll brush that on real quick, lighten it up a little bit. So this yellow would be good for like mixing a green. If you tried mixing a green from this, you can do it, but it would be duller. This is cadmium red pale hue. Alizarin crimson hue, and this is a hue color because the real alizarin crimson fades. So they've come up with like a recipe for a color that looks similar, but it's more permanent. Even in the professional brands, most of them are hue colors for that reason. You can buy the original alizarin crimson, but you got to keep in mind that it will probably fade. Ultramarine blue is a very popular color. I use it a lot. It's good for mixing purples, and if you want to mix like a dull green, it works well when you mix it with yellow. They call this intense blue, but it's really phthalo blue, and it is a very intense color, and it has a lot of tinting strength. Oops, I just contaminated my phthalo or my ultramarine. That's all right though. So you can see how intense that is. It makes good greens. You can make purple from it too. See if I can get rid of some of that. That's the thing. That's an example of lifting watercolor, is that some of these colors you can lift, and it's funny that it happened on phthalo blue because that's like a staining color. It's harder to lift, but ultramarine blue, you can lift it. So if I add water to this, it doesn't come up as easy as the ultramarine blue. The next one here is the Viridian hue. And Viridian looks a lot like phthalo green. I'm not sure if it's the same pigment. I'd have to look that up. It's a very intense green. It's transparent. It's also a staining color. What I'm noticing is these colors are pretty intense. These are student grade watercolors, and these colors are rather vivid. That's why I recommend them. Sap green is like a mixture of multiple pigments, and it's kind of like a shortcut for a green you might use in a landscape. It's not as like unnatural as this Viridian. Next up is yellow ochre. Now if you use a yellow in a landscape, like you could probably use this instead of a super intense yellow. Like if you wanted to paint like dull yellows of like a stack of hay or something, I would use this as like a shortcut. Next up is burnt sienna. This is like a workhorse. I mean, this is a very popular color. It's like an orangey brown, whereas the next color, burnt umber, it's a darker brown. So burnt umber, you can see that's more like a chocolate brown. Chinese white, it's not going to show up on this paper, and I really don't use it. I mean, you might use it to make a color more milky, so if I could demonstrate that. You gotta be careful with it because it'll make everything cloudy, and if you want your colors to be vivid, I wouldn't include it in the painting. So if I take some of this phthalo blue, mix it in there, it creates more of like a white blue. You might be wondering, where's the black? Well, you could easily mix it. So you have ultramarine blue, and you can mix it with burnt sienna, or you can mix it with burnt umber, and I'll just demonstrate that real quick. And you have these mixing areas over here, and I like that they have these dividers in here so that, let's say you have like yellow in here and you want to have a mixture of blues, it won't creep into your yellow and create green. You can keep them separate. I got ultramarine blue, and then for the first one, I'll just do burnt sienna. You can see it goes darker. You got to get the ratio right. You can test it out on the paper. So you can tell that's like a grayish color. You can get it darker if you add more pigment in there. And then I can do the same thing with the ultramarine blue and the burnt umber. Now, you can wash your brush out every time you pick up a new color, but I don't really care too much. Unless it's like my yellow, I don't want to get too many other colors in there because it makes it more difficult to get a clean yellow out of it. You can see, I think the burnt umber worked better. It's a little bit darker because I think the burnt umber is darker to begin with. I wouldn't buy a separate black because you can easily mix it. And why use up one of these spaces for a color that you can mix? I dried this with a hair dryer, and this is what it looks like when it's dry. Watercolors have a tendency to dry lighter, but these still look pretty intense. And there's the black that I mixed from burnt umber and ultramarine. This one has like more of a warm tone to it. Next, I'll work on a ink and watercolor sketch in my sketchbook just to show how they work for an actual painting. I recommend these Pentel mechanical pencils. They're the Pentel Twist Erase Express mechanical pencil, and it's the 0.7 millimeter lead. The number is underneath this orange paint. Here's another one where it says 0.7 millimeters. What I like about them is that you don't need a pencil sharpener. You just click the end of it to advance the graphite. And it also has a very large eraser in the end. Like, I've already used a lot of this, and there's still quite a bit left. It's got a nice comfortable grip. And what I like about mechanical pencils is that it's easy to erase. There's a basic sketch, and it's of a ship at the waterfront downtown. Next up, I ink it with a pen, and I use either the Staedtler pigment liners or microns. And they come in different sizes. This is a 0.5, this is an 0.3, and you can get them in a variety of widths. It's important to use waterproof ink because when you paint over with watercolor, you don't want the ink to lift and make your colors all gray. I also have this Pentel brush pen, and it has refillable cartridges in there. So there's all this black ink in here that you can use up, and then you can replace it. And I like the variation in line width, so you can get some dry brushing effects by using the side of the brush. I do that in the water. Cleaning out the palette is pretty simple. You can spritz some water in there and wipe it up with a paper towel. I might use this brush to put on some details, but I think I'll have an easier time with this larger Cotman brush. So I'll add some water to my palette, and then I think I'll use some of this ultramarine blue. So I'll take the ultramarine blue, and I think I want a little bit of green in there. I could take some Viridian and mix that in there. See how that turns a little bit more greenish. A lot of times I'll start off with like a faint wash like this, and then pick up some color and some sections I want to be darker, and I'll just drop it in there. So here's some ultra and Viridian. There's a section here that has more color in it. And the idea is you let the watercolor do some of the work. Like, you let it spread on its own. I already got this wet, so when I put the color in here, it should start to bleed into the other areas. I'll let that dry, and then the sky, maybe I'll use some phthalo and a touch of the alizarin just to kind of make it a little bit more purplish. See, a new palette beads up like this, but that'll go away with use. And this seems to spread out a little bit better, and I think it's because I let that paint dry on there. I found that if you let the paint dry on there and then clean it off, it breaks the palette in sooner. So I wouldn't worry about this beating up too much. Put more alizarin in there. Okay, and then I'll do the same thing. I'll put in like a faint wash. And I'll actually use the same color in the ship. So I'll let some of that drip down here, and maybe even in the background. I'm thinking maybe I could let some of this color seep up into the ship if that will happen. I'm not sure if it will. The same thing, I'll just charge it with some color, rinse out the brush, and then maybe I can encourage some of this to seep down further on the ship. If you want to pick up some extra paint, you dry off your brush. I just dipped it onto a rag, and then you can see how that soaks it up. Dry that off with a hair dryer, and I'll go back into the sky for a second wash just to get more of a sense of clouds being in the sky. I think that's a little too intense. And I'll put a little more detail in the water, or a little bit more color. The shadow areas on the ship. This foreground water goes darker. And this is where the small brush might come in handy, is that I can use it to put in finer detail. So this is the ultramarine and alizarin again. It's kind of like a purplish color, and that's where I can add a lot more dark areas, shadow areas. If I want that to go gray, I can add some yellow in there. I kind of like the purple tint too, so I could just apply some detail in here. There's some bushes behind the ship. There's like a park behind it. So this is sap green, and that's what I was talking about. It's not too bad for foliage. I could put a little touch of viridian in there just to give it some variety. Now the background will be mostly like a dull color. Here's another Cotman brush. It's a number 1, and it's got a very fine point. I dried it off real quick just so that when I put these lines in here, the paint won't bleed into the background. So I'll put in some of the finer details of the ship. I like to go back into it with a pen once it's dry. I like to put a bold outline around the outside. I don't care if it's wavy, that gives it more character. This is one use that I found for the white. I use it to put in highlight details with a fine brush. When you're finished, you can either wipe all this dry or just let it dry off on the palette. When I first get a palette, I definitely let it dry on there so that you get rid of the beading up problem. And you don't want to close the lid until these are dry, because if you trap all that moisture in there, then you might get mold inside of here. So it's good to let this sit. Like if you're outside, you can let it sit in the sun and it'll dry those pans of watercolor out faster that way. If you use them up, you can just replace the pans with new ones, whatever color you want, or maybe the same colors. I've also have another one where I cleaned out the pans when it was done, and I squeezed out 2 watercolors in there and let them dry. So sometimes I buy these just for the palettes. Overall, I think these are a good value. I like the size of the palette, the colors are good, and they're light fast. Give them a try and see what you think.